would you say that Daniel chapter 7 infers that the Son of Man is a divine being?
Okay, so you're probably working off of what Michael Heiser said, right? So he's
Yeah, I think he mentioned it at one point.
Yeah. So what he's saying is that the material is built off the Baal cycle, and so you would draw parallels from the Baal cycle to what Daniel is saying, and then from that you would connect the dots and infer, well, obviously this is a divine being, right? I mean, I'm not saying within the biblical material you do have this aspect of responding to other cultures' theologies and understanding of the divine. And the biblical material does use the Baal stories and inverts them and subverts them. So, like for instance, the phrase "rider of the clouds," that's a well-known Baal title that's applied to the Most High. You've got the account of like Elijah with the prophets of Baal, except by his word there'll be no rain. Elijah says, which is ironic because Baal was the season god who would bring rain. So it's taking the ideas, subverting and inverting them. So when it comes to Daniel, I wouldn't have any problem whatsoever if they were building the structure of what they're writing off of the Baal cycle. Whether or not that, therefore, it means the divine Son of Man is divine, that's another question. And also, that's not the only interpretation of Daniel 7.
Yeah.
Like for instance, some scholarship would argue, like Crispin Fletcher Lewis, that what you're seeing in Daniel 7, specifically about the Son of Man, that the actual context is the temple. And so when basically the Son of Man is taking on the role of the high priest, and you got the cloud imagery and so forth like this, but the real context behind that is the actual going into the Holy of Holies, the Temple of Incense. And so you got different scholars who would argue this, like Chris Fletcher Lewis and Margaret Barker, who would argue for high priestly context of Daniel 7. And to me, I'm more persuaded at the moment of the high priestly context of Daniel 7.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you've got, like, if you look at the Hebrew that's employed, and Margaret Barker brings this out, is the Son of Man come or is brought near to the Ancient of Days. He's brought near, with the word employed there is used in terms of priesthood bringing near offerings, and so you could understand the Son of Man doing the role of an offering, being brought near to the Most High.
So would you say that with what you just said kind of coincides with in Matthew when Christ is brought before the priest, and he says, the Son of Man will sit at the right hand of power. Do you think that coincides with what you're mentioning in Daniel 7 with the high priestly?
So the idea of sitting on the right hand is built from a combination of texts, like Psalms 110, but it also would include, in my view, things like Daniel 7. The problem, one of the problems that you're going to face is, what does he mean by Son of Man? And so this is a great big scholarly debate of how is it being employed, and generally speaking, scholarship are unsure of how the phrase Son of Man is being used. What's the source there? So there's different views about the source of this, and Daniel 7 is one of the avenues that the scholarship go down and say yes, it is connected to this. But then there's other scholarship who would argue that the phrase "son of man" is just a general term for a human being. So you got different views on that, but me personally, I wouldn't have any problem in saying that he's building his imagery off of Daniel 7, Psalms 110, and places like that, and he's bridging things together. When it comes to Daniel 7, I get what Michael Heiser's doing, but again, there's what some other scholarship would argue, like N.T. Wright, for instance, is if you notice the narrative of Daniel when it comes to him being placed into the lion's den, what happens when he's brought out of the lion's den? He's exalted and he's given great power. And what some scholarship have noted is that there's parallels there to Daniel 7, because the Son of Man gets exalted and he gets given power. And so what they say is, well, Daniel 7 is actually basically paralleling what you're seeing with Daniel, and Daniel is prefiguring what you're seeing in Daniel 7. And so that's a different way of reading the text than how Michael Heiser is reading it, in terms of building off of Baal.
Why can't they just agree, Naz?
Because you're dealing with interpretation, right? Unfortunately, we don't have the person in front of us who wrote these texts, and so we can't ask them specific questions about their intention behind it. And so basically what we have to do, we have to reconstruct their intention and their thinking. And that's the problem. Once you begin to do that, you don't have all of the information, and you can come up with different explanations as to the reason why they're doing what they're writing. And so within scholarship, it's not a case of we know what this writer is saying. It's a case of what is this writer saying more likely, or what's the probability that they're saying this because of X, Y, or Z. And so again, you're dealing with areas of probability. Because unfortunately, we don't have the person in front of us. We can't go inside their brain and figure out what they're thinking. It's like we have a text and that's it. If you go to scholarship like Daniel Boyarin, what he'll write about is there's a place in the Talmud, I don't know off the top of my head, where it connects two different pictures of the Messiah like together. Like for instance, and I'm going to do this terribly because I'm doing this from memory. But it will give the general sense of if Israel is worthy, then the Messiah will come on clouds. But if they're not, he'll come on a donkey. And so within the rabbinic material, there is this idea of the Messiah is connected to the Son of Man. And as I said before, if you go to the actual scholarship on this, Daniel Boyarin, he's written an article about this.
You touched on this with Jacob the other night, talking about the Baal cycle.
Yeah, I mean, but that was in a different context. The
Right.
context for that one was Daniel chapter 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another place which scholarship would argue that there's interaction with our cycle. You also see this in Psalms as well. Like, for instance, the phrase "rider of the clouds," right? It's a well-known Baal title, which is applied to the Most High. And so basically, what's happening is that it's taking that title, inverting and subverting the narrative of Rider of the Clouds isn't really Baal, it's the Most High. This also happens with mounting imagery, like you've got the mounting of the north, and I believe it's Psalms 29. It seems to be built off of Baal texts. So it's responding to it's these things weren't written in a bubble. They're responding to real issues, and it's like a struggle in it and a debate with outside influences, and it's taking their text, taking their theology, subverting it, inverting it, and then applying it to the Most High to demonstrate that He has sovereignty and authority, that He is the one which you should worship.